Hello, hello, hello. In this video, I want to talk about, well, this. Abstraction, 3D rendered photorealistic abstraction, right? And I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm also going to, of course, show you how you can make it, because this is, first and foremost, a tutorial channel. This has been rendered using Vray in Rhino, using a single mesh, a single camera, I believe 2 light sources, and a back plane. That's it, right? So how do you achieve this, right? And also, why would you? So before I show you how, I want to talk about why, because I think it's quite important. AI, a buzzword that's been bothering us for the past few years and will continue bothering us for the years to come. Recently, in the last few years, AI has been changing up the scene in terms of 3D rendering quite a bit, with its ability to take an image that is poor quality, poor light quality, poor material quality, and being able to upscale it to something that is photorealistic. And the things that you have to pay for, or no, the way of how you have to pay for it is through accuracy, through the loss of accuracy. We all know that, right? We all played with these AI generators as well as AI upscalers. And this is a little bit getting in the way of Vray's, well, the way of how Vray works, which is a physically accurate render engine, like a render engine that produces physically accurate results. Let me change the slide so that I keep your attention, right? So, which means that now the skill level that you need to have to produce photorealistic renders is quite small. So where does Vray stand in all of this? What is the new position for Vray? And I think the value that Vray and other softwares such as Vray has in this day and age of AI upscaling, in this case, is its ability to actually calculate the light itself, and the way of how light works, the way of how light filters, and so on. And that is something that high skill level individuals still can use to drive emotion, right? To drive something that is a little bit more than just information, right? Think of it this way: a photorealistic render of a house, right? Just a regular interior shot or exterior shot, doesn't matter, but just this kind of typical photorealistic render, that is, if it was a movie, it would be a documentary, right? There are good documentaries, there are bad documentaries, but it's a factual thing, a thing that tries to present the reality the way of how it is without distorting it in any other way, right? But a distorted image such as this or this is more like a drama, right? It tries to evoke emotion. It's an artwork, right? It's an art piece. And the question is then, is it possible for you as a creator to use a tool? What kind of tool can you use to create these art pieces that evoke emotion, right? That are a little bit more nuanced. They don't talk about reality, they talk about how does the reality feel, or how would you like the reality to feel. If, for more pragmatic people that are listening to this spiel, if you were to render an interior shot, right, and there is one area in your whole interior shot where the light just filters through the glass in such a beautiful way that you really, really want to capture it and show how the silhouette breaks down. And this is kind of starting to get to what I'm showing you here, how the silhouette breaks down and what kind of feelings does that evoke. What tool would you use, right? For me, it's Vray, right? Because I tried it with other render engines, and that level of light calculation, the refraction and multiple layers of refraction, it just starts breaking down. If you have again, interior shot or exterior, and you just love how the soft shadows travels from the tree leaves, travels on the facade that is reflective, and how does it play with the reflections of the trees itself and the light and so on, right? You just want that abstract image, not the whole building, but just that. What software do you use? Again, a software that is capable of doing it. And in my opinion, that is not something that you can mimic with AI. I don't think we will get there anytime soon. Photorealism, sure, but that kind of a cinematic, like driving of emotion, not really. So in this video, I want to show you how just using, we will use cubes. I will not be using a mesh such as this or anything like that, just cubes, but I'll show you how to achieve this kind of a dappled effect, almost inky tone. Maybe we'll use some color effect just through photorealistic layering and tools that Vray for Rhino has to offer. So if you are still listening to this spiel that I'm doing, thank you. It means a lot because it's my job to think about these things, and it's my job to kind of think about how does it all fit together. If you agree or disagree, I would love to either stroke each other in the comments or, you know, fight each other in the comments. So leave a comment. And then without any further ado, let's jump into, you know, the tutorial part of this video. All right, let's begin. So what you see here is a very simple scene, and this is going to be our head start scene. Patreon supporters get all of the files that we do on this channel for free. As long as you support the channel, you get the scene files. So consider supporting me on Patreon if you want the files and you don't really want to follow along, you just want to have them. But anyway, the scene itself is very, very simple. 2 cubes, 100 by 100 by 100 millimeters each, just floating in space. A single backdrop plane, right? Like that. 2 lights, 2 rectangular lights that are set up to be disk lights, and a single camera position that is being shown on every other viewport. And one of the viewports is changed from a right viewport to perspective, so that I can mess around with things in 3D without really touching the camera one. I guess for a tutorial purpose, the way of how you actually show the camera in other viewports is by selecting camera 1 and typing in camera and choosing to show. So any viewport that you have, for example, if I go to perspective and I click on show, wait, am I stupid? I go to perspective, I type in camera, click on show, there we go, okay, good. And now you can see that I'm basically looking, in every view I see my perspective camera, right? So that's what I done to camera 1. Camera, click on show, voila, it works, right? Besides that, the way of how you save the view is by typing in named view command, and just clicking on the save button. Easy as that. Okay, now when we are up to speed, let me show you how you can mess around with this. Oh, sorry, one more thing is I always notice that people are doing this wrong, so I want to make it clear. Exposure and filmic tone map. Exposure lets you mess around with the exposure, you know, the brightness as well as the highlight burn and the contrast post render, right? So I have contrast ramped up for this. And filmic tone map enables you to then take that, basically those values, the brightness of the image, and the linear values, and it lets you soften it up with a curve, right? So this is the filmic tone map curve. And you can mess around with it as well by changing the shoulder and changing the linear strength and so on. I don't like to do that. I like to use the default ones. That's not what I wanted to show. What I wanted to show is that people sometimes use filmic tone map and then they change the exposure like that. But that kind of defeats the purpose, in my opinion. You first need to, you know, change the image with the exposure to, you know, increase or decrease the contrast, and then you run it through the softening that the filmic tone map provides, not the other way around. So make sure that always exposure layer is below the filmic tone map layer when you're working with the image. Okay. So now let's talk about abstraction. This is already somewhat abstracted because I have depth of field effects in play. If I go to the settings here, bam, I have depth of field turned on. Actually, I want vignetting as well, but I have depth of field turned on, and basically it follows a 1.2 f-stop lens, right? If I change the focus point to something like this, you can see that the depth of field kind of responds and behaves exactly as I want. Oh, by the way, the softened edge that you can observe here, that looks kind of nice, is actually from a built-in tool in Rhino that is called edge softening. Under properties of any object, you have edge softening that you can turn on. So we already have a certain level of abstraction, but it's not enough, right? We want that inky behavior. How do you achieve that? Glad you asked. So the way of how you can achieve it is by, first of all, creating a plane in your perspective view. And here on purpose, I have it set to be wireframe. And it's because when I type in plane, I will choose 3-point plane, and I'll just create it from the middle of the camera target to the top and to the side. So this surface is created. In my camera 1 view, it looks like that. 1/4 of the screen, right? And then I'm just going to take it, scale it up tiny bit, and I'll move it, and I'll position it in a way that should be done in perspective view actually. I'll position it in a way that it completely covers the field of view of my camera. And all you can see is just the plane. It's red because I have back faces that are colored red. I'll just flip it so that's, you know, it's regular. Now, when I'm rendering this, we're just rendering the plane. But now we have something in between us and the object that can have qualities of how it behaves with the light that we can change, right? So what if I create a new material, generic? I'll just keep it as generic. I'll just drag it on top of my plane. Now it became even darker. And what if I go to refraction and I choose refraction color to be full white, right? So it's glass. You can see in the preview where we just made glass. Overly clean glass and so on, but it's glass, right? It seems like we are back to square one. It's almost as if the image is the same, but not really. There are changes. Change number one is that this is not as sharp anymore. And why? Because glass by itself is like fully transparent. It has zero glossiness. It should be, you know, crystal clear. But this is not as sharp as, well, actually I can show you. Let me just hide that plane. This is with the plane hidden, right? And then if I type in show, this is with the plane shown. Observable change in sharpness. The reason is this index of refraction. It bends light. And since it bends light, the distance between you and the object, observed light travel distance between you and the object is not the same anymore, right? It's a little bit longer. It should be longer. It's a little bit longer, so it doesn't focus on that particular point anymore. This is where every single real-time render engine that I was testing out starts breaking down and does not operate. This is where you can't calculate light to this accurate degree anymore, right? If I change index of refraction to 1, we're going to be back to the sharp corner. And if I change it back to 1.6, we're back to the not so sharp corner, a little bit more blurry corner. It's a small thing, but hey, it matters. Refraction glossiness, that's where the magic happens. If I change this to 0.9, everything's blurry, right? Clearly, you know, these things are starting to kind of botch together and like everything starts becoming real blurry. 0.8, we're starting to get somewhere. It's starting to become a little bit more interesting. But then, hey, what if that plane, that filter that we have, does not have a consistent refraction glossiness, but rather it has a variable one? What if we use a texture that is, for example, a noise map? And I'll use noise B for this. For the noise map, white is 1, black is 0, which means that some of the areas of the overall glass plane are fully glossy or non-glossy, sorry, meaning they're like, they distort too much. Color A and color B need to be much closer together for us to start getting interesting results, right? And this is hard to see, you know, of what's really going on. So I'm just going to take the low values, I'm going to take the high values, and I'm going to bring them a little bit closer together. And now hopefully you can see a little bit better, because basically we're changing the edge softness of the filter itself, that some areas are transparent properly and other areas are this kind of a diffused glass, right? And then I can change the size, or rather, let's go for turbulence mode, like that. Some areas are glossy, other areas are not. And then I can distinguish which is which, right? So I can break apart the image this way, right? And this is not me playing around with like Photoshop filters or anything like that, not at all. This is me actually messing around with the materiality of the light, or materiality of the surface that transmits light, which means that if I took a piece of glass, I took some sandpaper and I sanded it with this pattern, and I took a camera and I took a picture of two cubes through this is what I would see. Considering that the sandpaper produced the exact same glossiness, right, as what we're getting here. Hopefully this makes sense. So making it manually is cool and all, but the better way of how to do it, in my opinion, is by just downloading it. So if I go to Chaos Cosmos browser, and I will just simply go to materials, we need to expand this so that we have access to the left-hand side menu, and I just go to glass. G is for glass. And I have already downloaded a few of these to test out. I don't remember which one is which. 1 second. That seems a little bit too much. Let's try this one. Glass structured twigs, glass structured pyramids, glass structured floral. Floral, I like floral. Let's try floral. So now if I just slap on this structured glass floral mosaic, you can already see the effects at play, right? And the reason why we're getting these effects is because of the normal map in this case, and also because of the refraction, right? Refraction of how it works. Actually, the refraction glossiness is set to 1. So if you want to really mess it up, you can set it to 0.5 or 0.95, apologies, to soften it a little bit further. If you want, you can also use the glossiness from the previous material for this, and so on, right? Let me purge the materials for a second. Sorry. Right. So with the floral mosaic here, we're kind of getting to where I want to be. Actually, I want the material itself to be darker. Something closer to this. And I want this mosaic not to be uniform, but actually to have a directionality to it. And the way of how we can achieve that is by simply UV mapping the material, right? Or not the material, sorry, UV unwrapping the plane. My bad. The way of how I have it set up, and this is something that you can check out in my previous tutorials, is I have this UV checker map, right? UV checker map that shows me how a prototype 1x1 meter texture is tiled on any surface, right? So it's a UV map checker. And I can just select this and go to texture mapping. I'll just use a planar mapping tool. Draw the plane, actually 3-point plane. Just draw it properly, enter, and now I'm just going to mess around with this, not even the size, just the rotation of the plane. Oh, I need to type it in. Let's go for 45 degrees, right? With 45 degrees, nothing changes here, and that's because my texture has not been, what's the correct word? It's not stretched, it's just rotated, so the uniform pattern was just rotated. But then if I also change the size of this, let's go for what if this is smaller? Like that. You can see the repeating patterns starting to emerge. So instead of repeating it too much, I'm going to increase the size of this a bit more, and maybe increase this to something like that. And this one, I'm basically just stretching the texture, right? And this one, let's say it's 5,000. We end up with a look that is like this, right? And then I can change the angle until I get something peculiar. 1 second. Let's go for 45 here. Just give me a second. Actually, I kind of want to see this this plane here, so I'm gonna zero it out. I think it might be rotating weird, so I'm going to just click on the show mapping tool, which will show me exactly this mapping right here. And I'm just going to change the gumball, align to object, there we go. And I'm just going to change the angle of the mapping until, you know, the strokes are at the angle at which I want them to be, which is actually, yeah, this seems to be fine, right? The length of this is a little bit too aggressive, so instead of 5,000, I'm going to use 3,000. Yeah, something like that. That's the distortion that I was talking about. That's the distortion that I wanted to show. And this is these are 2 cubes, right? So it's never going to be something like very wow, but it's getting there. I'll add one more layer of distortion, and then we'll call it a day. So for the second layer, and actually I kind of want to brighten this up a bit. So I'm going to increase decrease the shutter speed down to 600. And I will change the material for this to be even darker. Something like that. And then where we had the, where is it? Sorry. The defocus, I'll change this to 0.6. Right? Because it matters also, sorry, I forgot to mention, it also matters how close the image or the filter plane is to the camera. The closer it gets to the camera, the more of a effect, the defocusing effect is going to have. The closer it is to the object, the sharper the patterns are going to be, right? That's also an observation that I had. So there is no real kind of correct way of doing it. You just kind of test it out and then see what's the distance and at which, you know, the inky tones are starting to become just inky enough for you, if that makes sense. Also, you can always go in and change the normal map to something more aggressive, you know, and then break it apart even further, something like that. Then for the refraction glossiness, apologies, for the refraction glossiness, I will be using some form of a noise map, but very, very simple. This is like where we begin experimenting rather than saying that this is the way of how it has to be done, right? Like that, and then darken this up, something like this. Okay. So inky blacks, white background. I like it. I like how this turned out. I will not be changing it up too much. I don't like this area in particular. I think it breaks a little bit weird. So I might either change the rotation of the cube ever so slightly, and now it's fixed, or I would change some other things. Do we want a third cube? Yes, we always do. Boop. There it is. Just make sure that it's somewhere placed, somewhere neat. Actually, in this case, it's so difficult with a single screen. Gumball, align to C-plane. There we go. And let's just rotate, move it way back. in there, and it's too static, so I'm going to, it's too static, so I'm going to mess around with its position a bit more. Maybe something like that. Maybe it's actually smaller and it's actually above these guys. There we go. Something like that. I think that's nice. Don't you agree? And then, of course, the next step is to increase the size of it, right? So I'm going to stop the render. You always want to render these things out at large scale so that you can investigate like small behaviors of it, like edge conditions and so on. So I'm going to keep it at medium quality, that's fine. But for the render output, we're doing 4K, at least for this video. I think I'm rendering it out at 6K when I'm actually rendering these things out. So 2160 for the height. We do real time? No. We do final gather render, like that. So while this is working, I just want to note that this is me just playing around with the black and white version of this. Of course, you can do color, you can do different color lights and so on. I just want this to be as simple as possible because I know how much I talk, right? And how long it takes for me to kind of show things, and we don't want this to become a 1 hour tutorial. We want this to be at around half an hour, right? So I'll let this render, and once it's done, I will cut it in a way that, you know, shows different areas of these cubes and different close-ups of these cubes, and just kind of shows what we were able to achieve, right? So hopefully it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, or what the hell did we just do? We just rendered out a few cubes in this tutorial. Then watch the beginning of the video where I blab. Hopefully it will make sense, you know, from me blabbing, from me explaining my thought process and why we need to do abstractions and why do we need to try to push or explain the feeling of the form rather than just the form itself. You know, artistic movie versus documentary, the whole spiel at the beginning. If you want this scene, become a Patreon supporter and you will be able to download it and replace these objects with your object and play with the settings. And with that being said, I think that's kind of it. That's about it. Vray still has a pretty solid footing in the industry, simply because of how accurate the light calculations are and how much you can actually experiment with it, or how much you can achieve with it. I'll see you in the next one. Later.